I'm going to share with you 7 juicy tips on how to incorporate story and why you need to incorporate story into your sales presentations. Hey, it's Tom Jacobs here. Thanks for joining the channel. I love revealing more and more information about sales to those solopreneurs, solo practitioners to help you increase your sales and make more conversions. In the sales environment, having a story that you can tell to your prospect, whether that's your own personal story or a story of a client that you've helped in the past, is essential for creating that connection between you and the prospect, but also so that they understand. Because every time that we hear a story, we hear it, we feel it, and we understand it. And the best thing about stories is that you can't deny it at all. The stories that you choose for your presentation are somewhat important, but they can be a personal story. And one of the stories that I always like to use when I owned my fitness center was my body transformation story, where I lost 40 pounds of fat, gained 10 pounds of muscle, and got my cholesterol and my blood pressure all in order. And when I shared that story with perspectives, and whether I was doing that to one person or a bunch of people, everybody leaned forward and they were like, wow, you're going through exactly what I went through or what I'm going through, and I'm going to trust you to help me do the same. And the same thing can happen to you in your stories. When you're telling the stories in a sales presentation, a lot of times, especially clients that come to me and ask me for my advice, they're worried that the story that they're telling, the personal story that they have, does not relate to the product or service that they're selling. And that doesn't really matter. We can always create a nice bridge between the lesson learned in the story and the product and service that you sell and why you're passionate about selling that product or service. So don't worry about the story and if it relates to your product, because it's pretty easy actually to create that bridge about the lesson that you learn. Another place that you will want to include some stories is when a client comes up with an objection. And really in my world, objections are really just clarifying questions. So at the end of the sales presentation, you ask the prospect to purchase and they say, oh, I'm not quite sure. Now you can go into a story about somebody that told you that exact same thing that ultimately purchased from you. So you're showing that prospect that, hey, I understand what you're talking about, but Jane, when she came in and talked to me, she had the same issue or same question, and we addressed it this way. And that's another great way of using stories to handle objections. In those sales presentations too, when you are telling personal stories, your own personal story or a story of a client, it's easy if you've done it 100 times or 1,000 times to get kind of bored with your own story. And one thing that I urge you not to do is just to go through the story, just to go through the story, but rather put yourself in that situation again. And by doing that, you can now bring in those emotions that were happening when you were actually going through that event that you're telling the story about. And that is going to keep that story alive, not only for yourself, but also for your prospect. And it doesn't matter if you've done it one time or 1,000 times. If you put yourself back into that story, you will keep it alive. Now, once that customer has come on board, they love your story so much that they bought your product and service. Now, how do you keep that customer with you for a lifetime? Because there's really 3 levers that you can pull to increase your revenue, and lifetime value of a client is one of those. So every interaction that you have with that client, you can be thinking about what other problems might they have that you can solve. And when you approach them, you go, hey, you know what? I had another client that had this issue. Are you experiencing something like that as well? And if they say yes, no, that's a great entree into offering them a new product and service that will get them even better results. It's Tom Jacobs here. I hope you enjoyed that little tip. And if you did, just double click the screen and hit that like button.